Hi all, hope all is going great. We are headed down the other side of the semester quite soon. In other words, we've crossed the first half now, onward and upward. Even though this video may be on a little bit sooner, videos will be following quite soon. This is chapter 11, substance related, addictive, and impulse control disorders. We're going to focus on this chapter, and this whole assignment will be formatted a little differently, not that differently, but a little differently. And we're going to try to include more aspects of Bloom's cognitive taxonomy, particularly 4, 5, and 6. I don't know whether you're acquainted with this. I don't know whether you've ever heard about this, but Benjamin Bloom developed taxonomies. Taxonomies merely meaning classifications, and this is in the cognitive approach. And he thought, number one, the first thing we need is knowledge. Now, I will say this before we go on. Some individuals do not care for this approach. They do not care for what Bloom did, but nonetheless, we're going to go with it because it kind of gives us a guideline. So, number one, the first thing we need is knowledge. We have two apples here, and we have two apples over here, and comprehension and application. And if we take those two apples from here and the two apples from here and put them together in a basket, we will have 4 apples. That's basically what 1 through 3 is telling us, and that is the lower order of learning skills. However, it's still necessary. And then the upper order of learning skills is analyzing, tearing it apart, synthesizing it, putting it together, and then evaluating what we have. Now, I wanted to bring that out because that's what we're going to be doing a little bit more of from here throughout the remainder of the semester is analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluation. Okay, we have substance-related, addictive, and impulse control disorders. I find that this is very interesting, and we're going to look through this now. We're going to look at the addictions that we've been talking about. What is an addiction? Is it a habit, loss of control, addiction? We have vocabulary, words describing individuals as users or abusers. We're hijacking the brain. I mean, all the way from a jug of vodka to having a refrigerator being a friend. And when we do not feel good and we're kind of out of sorts, we can visit a bottle of vodka, or we can go to the refrigerator and load up on carbs. I'm not saying one is better or one than worse. I'm just saying that these are ways in which individuals can handle their impulse. So we have a vocabulary then of a drug abuser, a user, an individual who's dependent. I'm not going to go there and spend a lot of time on vocabulary, but we are, in a way, we're hijacking the brain. Basically, we do this whenever we take any type of meds. We hijack the brain. Sometimes it turns out positive, sometimes it turns out negative. What is interesting here is that drugs and drug addictions have a physiological and a psychological effect. We become accustomed to traveling a certain path. We want to continue to travel a certain path, a certain route, engage in a certain behavior over and over again because it feels good and it feels natural. Okay, again, is it the habit? Is it some type of impulse, loss of control? Is it an addiction? And I'm certainly not pointing my fingers at anyone because we all have this type of behavior. Now, I was visiting with an individual who was a group counselor for individuals who were alcoholics. And he said, when he would start, he said, you folks are not alcoholics, you're drunks. That's what you are. He says, we'll have to call it the way it is. Well, we go from drunks to the addiction to substance abuser. I'm not hung up on terminology. Not in the least bit. And if individuals prefer, someone to be politically correct, and I think that's fine, I may not necessarily find it here. Individuals who are addicted, either addicted to a behavior or addicted to a substance, has one, they have one characteristic in common, and that is manipulation. Individuals can be good manipulators, whether or not they're bulimics and they need a gallon of mayonnaise to satisfy this desire, or whether they are a cocaine user, alcohol user, caffeine user, or whatever it is, individuals can manipulate. And what we're talking about here, this is where one is too many and 100 is not enough. And I'm sure that you have heard those aspects before. The DSM, the diagnostic issues in the DSM, and this is on page 400. And you know, the DSM pretty much goes along with society. They have been changing certain aspects in the DSM, in the past DSM, DSM-2, DSM-3, into the DSM-4, I think to meet the demands of a culture, of an ideology, of a way of life. And so it is kind of interesting what we have on page 400 in your text concerning the DSM. And I would certainly, I advise to read it, or I suggest that you read it. I don't advise. I suggest that you read it. Bill Maher, somewhat of a comedian, somewhat of enjoyable. Some individuals like him, some individuals don't. But anyway, he made this statement. Everything that used to be a sin is now a disease. Now, in particular, he was referring to alcoholism here. And if we go back in the history of alcohol, it's probably as early as prostitution. I don't know for sure, but I know that the history of alcohol goes back a long ways. And we have stories of individuals who felt as though that when something would ferment, it would become toxic, it would become poisonous. And at one time, a young lady broke up with her lover and she went down into the cellar and was going to take her own life where all this fermentation was taking place. And so she went in the cellar and started drinking this fermenting liquid, and she started feeling better. And, you know, people really were shocked that she was drinking it and feeling better. And so she went down again and she was feeling better again. And that's just one of the stories about alcohol. Like I say, I think that is quite early. One of the things that we found that we have today, that you can get fingernail polish, and if you put your fingernail in a certain drink, you can tell whether or not it has a drug in it. So you're out in the nightclub and you have a drink in front of you and you don't know whether or not there are any types of drugs in it, date rape drug, this type of thing. They do have fingernail polish that you can go ahead and put your finger in it and it will turn a certain color. Now, found in the text, and we're going to be discussing these in the chapter. So we have the chapter and we have the forms that I want you to focus on. But we have depressants and stimulants and opiates. Opiates is a synthetic form of opium derivative. We have opiates that come right directly from the plant. Hallucinogen-related disorders, gambling disorders, and we're going to go on a little bit further for some of the disorders that we have. Types of addictions, gambling, we talked about that. Video games, sex, Tiger Woods, cyber user, sex and shopping. I know individuals that were concerned because their spouse, after everyone had gone to bed, would get up, get on the computer and cyber sex. And some would cyber shop. Now, we have a shopping addiction where just individuals like to shop. We have food addiction. We have exercise addictions, television, procrastination. Put it off. That's an addiction. Yeah. And then there's some people that go out and they just have to get her done. I mean, you give them an assignment. Oh, my word, I have to get that done. All types of forms of digital apps. Games, video games. cell phones, Facebook, and it just goes on and on and on. And then we have the greatest game of all, which is called Sakai. Okay, then we have tattoos. Was told that tattoos was an addiction. Now I want to go through this real quick. We have a screen around our brain. It's called the blood-brain barrier. You can read a little bit more if you want to on this. It holds out certain substances. So if we ingest something into our body, it has to be able to cross the blood-brain barrier. So like alcohol, if it does not cross the blood-brain barrier, it cannot have any effect on individuals. Then we go from the dendrites to the cell body, to the axon, and then across the synapse and to the dendrite, and this is what takes place. Well, within the synapse is where we have our addictions properties. Now, nicotine supposedly just kind of massages the axon terminal and the axon end. And that is what allows it to release more, because basically we get high on our own chemicals that we have in our brain. What happens when additional chemicals are ingested is that they go ahead and set up the brain and either allow the brain to support us with more endorphins or with more or less endorphins, with some pain type killing properties. Runners that go out and run, and they've measured this, the pressure that they could take on the finger before the run, and then they would go out and they would run, and after the run they were able to take more pain. Now, so basically we have what is known as the morphine within. Now, THIQ, tetrahydrozoquilin, is a form that has been in the brain. I would expect this will probably be researched, so we're not going to go into it. But Virginia Davis was picking up warm bodies of alcoholics to study them. They were dead, of course. She was performing autopsies on them, and she found THQ in the brain of these individuals, which up to this time had only been in the brain of those individuals who were on heroin. But here we have alcoholics, and alcoholics had this in their brain also, which is an interesting study. And so in forums, I really feel as though it's kind of controversial, but at least touch on THIQ. Research this when we get to forums, and it will be set up in forums for you. Okay, you have a lesson in the chapter, which will be in lessons, and it will also contain some review, and then we have forums, and the title of forums is alcoholism really a disease? So until we get to the next chapter, you folks have a good day, and it's really been fun visiting with you and working with you, and I've just covered some of the material that we should be able to look at as we go through the study of alcoholism.